now, the World Health Organization says existing vaccines should still protect people from severe COVID as a result of being infected by the new variant Omicron. As of yesterday, nearly 450 cases of Omicron had been confirmed in the UK.
Yes, well, when it comes to hospitalisations, the most recent government figures here show that just over 7,300 people with coronavirus in hospital in the UK are there right now, so down from around 7,650 a week earlier. So it's going down, despite what you may hear. Although numbers of hospital patients with coronavirus are higher than they were over the summer, they are far below the peak of nearly 40,000 people back in January.
Yes, and daily deaths have been falling as well, and there were 180 deaths within 28 days of a positive test reported yesterday. Well, let's talk to Dr. Andrew Lilico, a leading economist and mathematical modeller who has studied the course and impact of the coronavirus pandemic. Thank you for joining us this morning. Just given on what we know so far about the Omicron variant and how much it's spreading, how worried do you think we should be?
I think it's premature to be too worried about it. I mean, the state of play essentially has three elements at the moment. So there's some data that suggests that the Omicron variant is increasing quite rapidly in the UK, but from a very low base. So the R number, the reproduction number, might be around 3.5 for that at the moment. Often when these viruses first turn up, the reproduction rate is a bit faster than it turns out to be later once it's more widespread. You might remember the very rapid growth in Bolton earlier in the year when the Delta variant was turning up there, and it wasn't at all duplicated when it went across the wider country, despite some, frightening headlines at the time. So the Omicron variant, it does appear to be spreading here quite fast at the moment. Second factor going on at the moment is that there's some tentative evidence that the Omicron variant might be relatively mild as a disease. That could be just a matter of the fact that the people getting infected have already had previous infections, or they're vaccinated. In most cases in South Africa, it's that they've had previous infections. And so that's kind of priced in. It's at least comforting, though, that the Omicron variant doesn't appear to be escaping the serious disease protection of the vaccines. And the third thing is that the early studies which came out last night suggested that actually the Omicron variant may not escape as much transmission protection, that is, the likelihood of you getting infected by the disease at all. It had been thought that it would escape a very high degree of transmission protection. It seems like it doesn't escape as much, and in particular, it doesn't escape nearly as much as feared if you have 3 doses of the vaccine. So if you've not had your booster, go and get that. Or if you've had hybrid immunity, that is, if you've had both the vaccines and the disease. And the UK is actually in quite an interesting position internationally on that. We probably have more hybrid immunity, this combination of both types of immunity, than almost any other country in the world. So it's plausible that other countries could actually have a lot worse problem with Omicron than we do in the UK.
OK, now, we're being told we're still doing tests on this thing. Obviously, of course we are, and we need to, and that's great. How long is it now before we're going to get a definitive answer on some of the things that you've just raised there? So how long will it be now before we absolutely categorically know whether or not Omicron is more transmissible, whether or not it's more dangerous, whether or not it's more evasive of vaccines? Surely that's only about a couple of weeks away, given the timeline we were told initially.
Well, it could be into the new year before people are still arguing about exactly how much protection there is for Delta from the vaccine. So it could be into the new year before you have very good studies of that sort. The reality is, though, that the Omicron variant is spreading so rapidly that will tell us most of the answer to these things by itself quite soon. If that slows down, that tells us that we have more protection than was thought. If that keeps going at the same rate, that tells us that we have just as little protection as was feared. In that case, of course, we find out quite rapidly also how serious it matters. Because it's one thing to say there might be an Omicron wave. It's a completely different thing to say, well, do we care? I mean, the reality is that over the next year or two, everyone was going to get the Delta variant anyway. It was so infectious and spreading, and so many people getting infected every week by it, that everybody was going to get it. It's not altogether apparent why we care that we get the Omicron variant next spring rather than the Delta variant next summer. So it's not altogether apparent that it's something that we should care about, even if there is a big wave.
Yes.
Yeah. And on that point, and about the behaviour of the public, the government seem to have got it all wrong. Well, in my opinion, that they're not doing a very good job at sort of telling the public how they should behave or how they should behave sensibly. Their messaging seems very off, and they do seem to be telling us on one hand, there's nothing to worry about, Christmas won't be cancelled, and then some officials say, well, actually, don't have any social contact. So what do you think the messaging should be right now from the government to make sure we're behaving sensibly based on what we know?
The government's message appears to be the Sajid Javid's line, which is go off and enjoy your Christmas. I think if Omicron is going to be an issue, it's going to be an issue in the new year. And if it's going to be an issue in the new year, having fun at Christmas isn't going to stop that from happening. So I would have thought that go and get your vaccine, get your booster. If you're actually sick, make sure you get yourself tested, all of those quite common sense things. But all this business that there seems to be of people cancelling nativity plays and cancelling their Christmas parties, there doesn't seem to be any basis for that at all at this stage. And the government, I think, they felt like they had to do something with this face masks and shops thing. And now they're complaining that everybody's reacted to that by doing other restrictions on themselves.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, the worst one for me is I'm no longer allowed to kiss Therese coffee under the mistletoe. I mean, goodness me. I mean, that's an absolute shocker. But, I mean, for me, I could understand initially why the government might have wanted to be cautious and why they wanted to potentially make us aware of this thing and just do something token, like you said there, slap a mask on when you go to Tesco's or whatever. But where we are now seems to be, to me, a campaign of misinformation. This morning I woke up to Boris Johnson talking about potentially vaccine passports. We might cancel Christmas. This, that and the other. And the fact as well that he's quoted as saying that as far as he can see from the evidence, it looks as though this variant might be more dangerous than Delta. And that's just a lie, isn't it?
Well, it's not a lie that it's more transmissible. It does appear to be quite clear that the disease is more transmissible than the Delta variant. It's unclear what the balance of that is between immunity evasion and being intrinsically more transmissible. Most of it is probably immunity evasion. And one thing about that is probably immunity evasion mainly focused on people whose only form of immunity was that they had previously had the disease, which is the dominant thing in South Africa. In the UK, 90% of the over 12s have had some kind of vaccine. 80% of us are double vaccinated, at least 33% and more are triple vaccinated. And we have quite a lot of this hybrid immunity. Might be as high as 45% of adults have a combination of having had the disease and having been vaccinated as well. So our immunity mix is very, very different from that in South Africa. And just because it escapes the type of immunity they had in South Africa, it doesn't follow that it escapes the immunity we have here. It might do, and it is spreading at the moment, so that's not a good sign, but it's not guaranteed. And so I think we need to distinguish between different things here. The government is saying that they think it spreads faster. Well, we've known that. That's found. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily a problem. I think in terms of these other kinds of messaging, my sense is that the government feels like it's under a lot of pressure by journalists to announce that there's going to be some extra lockdown or, all kinds of restrictions at the time. And it's saying, well, no, we're not thinking about that. We're just, if it comes to it, we may do this, this and the other, which is much less. And that's the way I think I would understand their position as being to try to manage a continual barrage of people demanding the most authoritarian and onerous and excessive restrictions.
It's amazing. It's amazing how many members of our media want to live in North Korea, apparently. I've discovered this over the last year and a bit.